The first night my parents left me home alone, I remember feeling proud, almost excited, like I'd finally crossed some invisible line into being trusted. I was 12 years old enough to cook instant noodles, old enough to lock the doors, old enough, according to them, to sleep through the night without panicking. They were only going to be gone until morning, just one night, a family emergency in another state, and they promised they'd call before bed. Our house wasn't small, but it wasn't huge either, a quiet suburban place with thin walls and old floorboards that creaked if you stepped on them the wrong way. I spent the evening doing everything I wasn't normally allowed to do. I watched TV too loud, ate snacks straight from the bag, left lights on in rooms I wasn't using. But when the clock crept past midnight, that excitement faded, replaced by a strange awareness I'd never felt before. Every sound felt closer. Every shadow felt deeper. The house didn't feel like our house anymore. It felt like a place I was borrowing, temporarily, and something about that made my stomach twist. I locked the front door twice, checked the back door 3 times, and finally went to bed, telling myself I was being stupid, that houses always sound different at night. Sometime after 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps. That was the first thing that truly scared me, because I knew exactly how footsteps sounded in our house. I'd heard my dad come home late 100 times, heard my mom pacing on the phone, heard my own steps echo when I snuck to the kitchen at night. These were slow, deliberate, and not following the usual paths through the house. They weren't heading to the bathroom, or the kitchen, or the stairs. They were just moving. I lay there frozen, staring at my bedroom door, listening as the sound shifted from the hallway to the living room, then stopped completely. I waited for a cough, a voice, something that would explain it away, but nothing came. I told myself it had to be the house settling, even though deep down I knew houses don't settle in patterns. I finally worked up the courage to whisper, "Hello." My voice sounded wrong in the dark, too loud and too small at the same time. There was no response, but a few seconds later, I heard something much worse. A soft scrape, like a fingernail dragging slowly across wood, coming from the other side of my bedroom door. I pulled the blanket over my head, heart pounding so hard it hurt, and stayed like that until I must have passed out from pure exhaustion. When I woke up in the morning, sunlight filled the room, and everything felt normal again. Too normal. I told myself it was a dream, something my brain made up because I was nervous about being alone. But when I went to the kitchen, I noticed one of the chairs pulled out from the table. I knew I hadn't moved it. I always pushed chairs back in, even as a kid. Then I saw the back door. It was unlocked. I distinctly remembered locking it, feeling the deadbolt slide into place, even tugging on the handle afterward just to be sure. My parents brushed it off when I told them, said I probably forgot, said old houses do weird things, and eventually, I convinced myself they were right. For a while, life went back to normal. Weeks passed, then months. Until the second time I was left alone overnight. This time, I was 13, and I wasn't scared going into it. I actually felt annoyed when my parents reminded me of the rules, like not opening the door for anyone and keeping my phone nearby. I went to bed earlier than usual, determined not to let my imagination run wild. But around the same time as before, just after 2 a.m., I woke up again. This time, there were voices. Low, muffled, coming from downstairs. At first, I thought the TV had turned itself on, but the words didn't sound like a show. They sounded like whispers, overlapping, stopping, and starting as if whoever was speaking didn't want to be heard. I crept out of bed and cracked my door open, just enough to see the hallway. The house was dark, but I could see the faint glow from the living room. Someone had turned on a lamp. I stood there, frozen, every instinct screaming at me to lock myself back in my room, but curiosity, or something darker, pulled me forward. Halfway down the stairs, the voices stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on me. Then, from directly beneath the stairs, a voice whispered my name. Not shouted. Not questioned. Just said it, calmly, like it had been waiting for me to come closer. I ran back to my room, slammed the door, and locked it, shaking so badly I could barely breathe. I stayed awake until morning, listening to the slow, careful footsteps move through the house again, stopping outside my door once, long enough for me to hear breathing on the other side. My parents never left me alone overnight again after that. Not because I convinced them. Not because I begged. But because one night, months later, my mom admitted something she'd never told me before. She said the house we lived in had another owner before us, a man who lived alone with his child. The child died in the house. After that, neighbors complained about lights turning on at night, voices, doors unlocking themselves. She said she never believed any of it. But she also said she never once felt alone in that house after midnight. Even now, years later, I still wake up sometimes around 2 a.m., convinced I hear footsteps moving where they shouldn't be. And every time I visit my parents, I notice the same thing. There's always a chair slightly pulled out at the kitchen table, like someone was just there, waiting, and got up when they heard me coming. The second time I was ever left home alone overnight, I was 10, and unlike the first time, I didn't feel brave about it at all. My parents framed it like a test, something I needed to pass to prove I was grown enough, but deep down I knew I wasn't ready. Our house was older than the one we lived in before, a narrow two-story place with steep stairs and a hallway that funneled every sound straight into my bedroom. During the day, it felt warm and lived in. At night, it felt hollow, like it was waiting for something. My parents left just after sunset, promising they'd be back by morning, leaving me with a charged phone, a list of emergency numbers, and strict instructions not to answer the door for anyone. I locked every door, closed every curtain, and stayed in the living room until my eyes couldn't stay open anymore. When I finally went upstairs, I kept the hallway light on, even though I knew I'd get in trouble for it later. I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the wall clock downstairs, counting the seconds until I could fall asleep and make the night disappear faster. I don't know exactly when I woke up, but I know it was deep into the night because the house was completely silent, the kind of silence that feels unnatural. No cars outside. No wind. Not even the hum of appliances. I was just starting to drift back to sleep when I heard it. The phone ringing downstairs. Not my cell phone, but the old landline we barely used anymore. The sound echoed through the house, sharp and insistent. I stayed frozen, listening as it rang again and again. I told myself not to answer it. My parents had told me not to. But the ringing didn't stop. It felt like it was filling the house, bouncing off the walls, demanding attention. Eventually, fear of whatever was calling outweighed my fear of going downstairs, and I crept out of bed, stepping carefully so the floorboards wouldn't creak. When I picked up the phone, my hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped it. "Hello?" I whispered. For a moment, there was only static. Then I heard breathing. Slow. Controlled. Too close. I asked who it was, my voice barely holding together, and after a long pause, a man spoke. He said my name. Not in a questioning way. In a familiar way. Like he'd said it many times before. I hung up the phone and ran back upstairs, slamming my bedroom door and locking it. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure whoever it was could hear it. I sat on my bed, clutching my phone, staring at the door, waiting for footsteps, for knocking, for something to happen. Nothing did. Minutes passed. Then my cell phone vibrated in my hand. A missed call. From the house phone. I stared at the screen, trying to understand how that was possible. Before I could even process it, my cell phone rang. I answered without thinking, sobbing now, begging my parents to come home. But it wasn't them. It was the same man. His voice was calm, almost gentle. He told me not to be scared. He told me he was already there. I screamed and threw the phone across the room, scrambling under my bed like that thin mattress could somehow protect me. From where I was hiding, I heard something that still makes my blood run cold. The landline downstairs rang once more, and then stopped abruptly. as if someone had picked it up. I stayed under that bed until the sky outside my window began to lighten. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't remember climbing out. I only remember my parents shaking me awake hours later, panic in their faces. When they asked what happened, I couldn't explain it without crying. They checked the phone records later. There were no outgoing calls. No incoming calls. Nothing. But the landline was off the hook when they came home. Hanging loose. Like someone had been using it all night. Even now, I can't hear a phone ring late at night without feeling that same fear crawl back into my chest. And sometimes, when my phone buzzes with an unknown number, I wait. Because part of me is terrified that if I answer, someone will already know my name again. The last time I was left home alone as a kid was supposed to be the easiest. I was 12 by then, old enough that my parents trusted me completely, or at least trusted me not to panic over small noises anymore. They were only going out for a few hours, not even overnight, and they reminded me, almost jokingly, that I'd done this plenty of times before. I remember nodding, acting confident, but the truth was I already felt uneasy before they even pulled out of the driveway. Our house had a basement that I hated. It wasn't finished. Just concrete walls, exposed pipes, and a single pull chain light that cast long shadows no matter where you stood. During the day, I avoided it. At night, I pretended it didn't exist. That evening, I stayed upstairs, watching TV with the volume slightly too loud, trying to drown out the quiet. The sun set, the house darkened, and every sound felt sharper. Still, nothing happened. For a while, I started to relax. That changed when I noticed the lights flicker. Just once. Subtle enough that I wondered if I'd imagined it. I checked the lamps. Everything was fine. The TV didn't cut out. The house didn't lose power. I shrugged it off, until it happened again. This time, I heard it too. A faint click. The sound of a switch being flipped. My stomach tightened. The only light switch that made that sound was the one in the basement. I muted the TV and listened, holding my breath. The house answered back with silence. I told myself it was old wiring. It had to be. I stood up, walked to the top of the basement stairs, and stared down into the darkness. The pull chain light was on. I knew for a fact I hadn't turned it on. I hadn't even been near the basement all night. The light cast a dull yellow glow over the bottom step, stopping just short of where I stood, like it was afraid to climb any higher. The light stopped a few minutes before my parents got home. When they pulled into the driveway, I ran outside barefoot, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. They searched the house from top to bottom. Nothing was out of place. The basement was empty. The pull chain light was off. My dad told me later that the chain was swaying slightly when he went down there, like it had just been touched. They blamed faulty wiring, stress, imagination. We moved out of that house 2 years later for unrelated reasons. But I never went into that basement again. Even now, as an adult, I don't like being alone in houses with basements. Because I learned something that night. Sometimes, when you're home alone, the house isn't. If anything like this ever happened to you as a kid, let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more true stories like these, make sure to like the video and subscribe.